Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar, Drive Cost and Time Out of Your APQP Process. I'm your host, Rich Tenaglia, Sales Director for Adaptive Corporation, and I thank you for joining us today. I've been selling to manufacturers for 35 years, and in the first half of my career, it was standard industrial parts to my customers who had already produced, manufactured their product, and were in final assembly. In the last 16 years, I've been at the front end of that process, providing software for product design, development, and engineering, and rapid prototyping equipment. Over the last half dozen years, I've observed a change. It used to be that a reasonably well-run manufacturing business with a good product and good people could expect to maintain itself at healthy income and profit levels. But now the adage, if your business isn't growing, it's dying, rings true for companies more than ever. Companies must continually seek and consider new ideas for product and process improvement. So today's webinar, Drive Cost and Time Out of Your APQP Process, is the third in our series of presentations on improvements that we've successfully provided to our clients. For your convenience, this webinar will be recorded for future replay. With that, I'll introduce our guest, Jonathan Scott of Razorleaf Corporation. His team and ours have been working together successfully on many client initiatives. Jonathan's strengths include vision and strategy planning, as well as detailed solution development. Today, he's going to provide us his perspective on how you can drive cost and time out of your APQP process. With that, I welcome Jonathan Scott.
Thank you, Rich. All right, so to start things off today, I'd like to return to what you were promised when you signed up for this webinar. You'll notice that I've copied the content of the email invitation sign-up page to this slide verbatim. Okay, so over the course of my presentation, I intend to hit on each of these areas. So let me review briefly without reading these points to you directly. All right, so the first point is about making better use of the time you have available in a schedule. Every project schedule has lag, but you have to be able to make effective use of it. The second point is about the time you spend proving you're doing what your OEM has asked, so we can reduce that time. The third item here makes me crazy because I hate seeing engineers turn into clerks. The fourth item here adds a little extra flavor to our cost and time points for the webinar title. You know, we mentioned drive cost and time out. Managing risk during APQP can help improve the profitability of your projects and tie right back to time and cost. And finally, there are simple things, or seemingly simple things, we can do to automate the repetitive stuff that eats away schedule time. I say seemingly simple because there isn't anything complex to it, and yet most companies aren't taking advantage of these little improvements today. So we're going to hit on all of these points and more today, so let's jump right in. All right, let's talk about why this is relevant to companies who participate in supply chains like automotive and aerospace. So a little definition first. APQP stands for Advanced Part Quality Planning. Translated into English, it means if I'm going to trust you enough to count on your design for the success of my product, I'm going to need you to prove to me that you know what you're doing. At least that's what's at the heart of this process between customer and supplier. Of course, it has evolved into a bit more than that over time. And with the nature of litigation these days, it can also mean I want plausible deniability for any of your mistakes. And you know, we've all seen news about this in the media recently. It's a hot topic. Now, all cynicism aside, customers think there's something valuable to be had by requiring their suppliers to abide by APQP standards and by requiring that suppliers report to them on various pieces of the process. Now, different relationships between supplier and OEM will have varying degrees of trust and varying requirements for verification, but I've yet to see any automotive or aerospace OEM just totally waive the requirement for their suppliers to perform APQP. Now, what all this means is that you're not going to avoid APQP, so you need to make it work for you. There are plenty of suppliers out there whose APQP processes are running them into the ground with things like penalties, late deliveries, recalls, etc. So let me describe then my perspective on APQP and how I think we can help you drive cost, time, and risk out of your APQP processes. So based on the companies I've worked with over the years who participate in supply chain, I've developed a premise for the suggestions I'm about to offer. These are things that I think are generally true across most situations. Now, this may not fit your situation fully, and my suggestions today, they may not all be right for your organization, but I'm hoping I'm generally hitting the mark, and I think these, my premise here will generally fit what you're dealing with. Okay, so first, APQP or a similar process is not optional for you. To sell to certain customers, you must comply with their quality programs, and they want you to provide proof that you're performing certain activities during design of your component. You don't just sell to one customer. So, and if you do, and maybe you do, right? But if you do, you're actively trying to sell to new customers. The theory here, right, is you want to sell the same or similar products to every OEM or tier one in your industry, if at all possible. That's how you get leverage. That's how you get this extra profitability, right? Design it once, reuse it a bunch of times. You may or may not track the profitability of each component that you sell, but you're aware that failing to deliver on time means penalties for your company. Whether you know the magnitude of the impact or not, I don't know if that comes down from the business side down to engineering for you. You know schedule delays cost your company money and profits. So there's a connection even if you don't see the direct dollars yourself. Now, another thing that I think is universal here is no matter how lean your customer is or claims to be, if they're not, but they think they are, there's nothing lean about your APQP reporting or certification requirements. You deliver hundreds of documents for every program you work on. Each document has to be in your customer's format, and that takes quite a bit of effort. On top of that, your quality group probably spends, I don't know, I'm going to say at least 40 hours of time each year convincing each of your customers that you're following their APQP processes to the letter. And again, if you come back up to the second point about wanting to deal with more than one customer, you see how this gets multiplied out. Lastly here, each project has its own unique quirks. Even the simple ones have something about them that makes them different and challenging. And a material change here can be more challenging than a geometry change over there, or vice versa. That means that the risk profile of your programs is not steady. It's always changing. Okay, so let me introduce you to 3 messages I hope you take away from today's session. You probably guessed it just looking at the title already, but I think there's time to be saved during APQP, there's money to be saved during APQP, and there is risk to be mitigated and avoided during APQP. Now, you've noticed by now, and I mentioned it a second ago, that I've added something beyond the time and cost in the title. I don't think you can talk about improving project work without at least touching on the topic of risk. And I believe the Innovia solution we're talking about today can help address APQP risk as well, and indirectly contribute to saving time and money. So it's clear that I believe you can improve your APQP processes in these ways, but how? That's the point of today, right? Let's dive right in and start with saving time. I want to share multiple ideas for saving time in APQP, but recognize that you won't be able to implement all of these ideas at once, and that doing them in a particular order or skipping some and adding others that are unique to you will yield the right formula for your business. So let me just offer a few of the ideas here. All right, so I've got 5 practical ways I'll suggest to you today to leverage PLM tools to save time on your APQP process. Locate information quickly. This one may seem like mom and apple pie. Most organizations have systems and methods for storing product-related data, from CAD to documents to test plans and more. Unfortunately, these systems are often department or function specific, making it difficult for designers to find test plans and challenging for project managers to find customer CAD models, etc. One of my customers recently estimated that not having a central repository for APQP-related data caused them to spend more than 40 hours each week unnecessarily looking for files. Now, that's across is across a group of 15 engineers, but nonetheless, think about that. 40 hours a week wasted just looking for stuff. Just using a single repository with a search tool can save significant time. Connect and centralize issue management. Every APQP process involves back and forth between customer and supplier, right? That's the nature of a two-company or multi-company relationship. And open issue tracking is critical to arriving at a satisfactory design. You got to track what's going on, you got to work those issues, and you got to run that list enough. But hours, maybe even longer or more, are wasted keeping track of issues in spreadsheets that can't be updated by issue owners, and with pulling together status updates from team members. We'll see in a few minutes how easy it is to connect issues to individual parts of projects and to quickly report on live data with no questions about status or time limits. Collaborate without friction. What do I mean by friction? It's that stuff that slows you down, right? Think about it in terms of a physics context. Friction is just there to slow down the motion that's happening. We want to collaborate without friction, without the things that get in the way and make it painful. Whether it's cataloging files received from a customer or recording what version of a file was sent to what partner or what customer on what day, managed file transfer is always laborious. And this is just one example, right? And what's worse than the time-consuming nature of this activity is that it often is asking an engineer to play the role of a clerk. Now, most companies would rather have engineers solving problems with their products than solving problems like, how do I get the right file to someone? Innovia can easily solve this issue, and with the security required to keep different OEMs' data separate and secure. So, I act like this is trivial, and for a PLM system like Innovia, it is. I'm not going to demonstrate that here today. Trust me, it is fairly straightforward. But there are criteria to it, right? It's not as simple as an FTP site. Security is important, visibility is important, but nonetheless, you can take the friction out of this. Automate APQP deliverables. Now, I won't say this is one you can do right at the start, but when you start counting the number of times you repeat a task, you really start to see opportunities for improvement. And preparing APQP deliverables is a natural place to look for this. You probably have different forms and templates to use for the various OEMs that you work with. But it's also likely that 80% of the information on the header of an FMEA is consistent from one customer to the next. And doing an FMEA is pretty much the same, regardless of the end customer, at least in terms of the type of content you put in. Even if the formats vary, you can save time by automating the creation of APQP deliverables and templatizing the various documents that are needed. Of course, this requires some configuration and a little customization of a system like Innovia. I don't mean to say that this one is simple and it's out of the box and you'll be ready for every OEM you work with. But it's huge in terms of time savings, right? So it might not be the first thing that you tackle in a project to try and speed up your APQP, but the benefits here can be significant. Okay, finally, capture decisions. My last suggestion for saving time during APQP is not one that people typically associate with PLM, and that's by performing some type of knowledge capture. Okay? Inevitably, on a product development activity, someone will second-guess the assumptions and decisions that led to a particular design solution. This can take significant time to discuss when it doesn't result in a change of course, and can be a real time sink when it distracts development. Now, much of this can be stopped by simply exposing the decisions that were made along the way. In addition to saving engineers from having to answer the same questions multiple times, documented decisions are very useful for saving time on future projects. When starting a new design, team members can quickly have a look at similar projects from the past and learn what decisions they might face and how others chose to deal with those decisions in the past. So you've got sort of a win-win here. Or maybe even a win-win-win. Documenting the decision to save time during the current project and then having it archived for later so that new teams can see, we're going to have to make a material choice. We're going to have to make a choice between a geography of supplier. And they'll know what somebody else did and why. These can be big time savers, right? In the normal course of business, maybe they're not. But every now and then, you've got a real nugget here. All right, so let's jump over to our demo. I'm going to show you some things in Innovia here and have a look at how using Innovia can save time in your APQP processes. Now, I'm not going to show you everything. Let me jump out of the PowerPoint here. Excuse me. This might be rough for a second while I transition over. I'm not going to show you all of the 5 points that I just talked about. I'm going to hit on a couple here. So I want to touch on the find, related to finding content. I'll get to that one in a minute. Track, related to tracking issues, and deliver, in terms of project deliverables and documents. All right, so I'm here in an Innovia solution. I've already logged in. You'll see I've logged in as Clara, the supplier project manager. That's her username in here. And inside of Innovia, I won't take you through a whole tour of everything that we're looking at because I just want to point out a couple of things. First, Clara has a number of sort of home screens she can look at. She's got a way to look at product lines, to look at programs. She's got her own personal dashboard with her own tasks and activities and things. But we're going to look at her projects dashboard. Now, the issue here that I want to touch on is about issues, about tracking issues. So it's important to track issues centrally, that I mentioned, but we got to get to them in the first place. So I want to just get down to the project that we care most about. You can see in the list of projects that are relevant to Clara. And by the way, this isn't everything in the system. These are ones relevant to Clara. But I'm going to pick on this ISD Seats 2016 APQP. Within here, I've got a lot of information, and I'm going to come back to some of this and touch on it a little bit later. But I want to just talk about issues for a minute. So I'm going to look at execution of the project. And within execution of the project, I've got a couple of areas that we're working on day in and day out. Issues are the ones that I care about at the moment. So what I mentioned, centrally track issues, right? Save the time of having multiple spreadsheets and multiple people with their own spreadsheets that other people can't necessarily see unless they email them around to each other. Put everything in one system. Now, these issues are organized by project, right? So I don't have to see the thousands of issues that might be in the system. I'm just looking at the ones related to this project. But if I want to see the hundreds or thousands of issues open in the system at any one point, or ones that have been closed, or any of that, I can do it because it is the central system managing these. So let me show you what it's like to create an issue. I'm not going to follow through with this. I won't take you through all the steps. But just to give you an idea, you come in, you say an issue, here's a description. It's reported against a project because that's the context I started in. I could add some other attributes about, when is it going to be, when's it started, finishing, what priority does it have, are there owners of this, is there a certain problem type? I can come down and fill in this metadata and note that it also goes against a certain organization. So it could be going against our organization, against the customer's organization, different ways of categorizing it so we can slice and dice it. So I won't add one here, but that's the idea. It's very quick and simple to just add a new issue. And I don't have to be Clara, the project manager in this case, to do it. Anyone with the rights, of course you got to give them the rights, but anyone with the rights in the system can do this. So we're already avoiding that issue of, well, I don't have the Excel spreadsheet, Bob does, and I forgot to send it to him, and so it didn't get tracked, and now it's not in this week's call with the OEM. You get the idea. All right, so here we have the issues that we're looking at. I want to show you the reporting part is just as simple. I need to get this out to my OEM, right? What did I click? I blew right by that, right? So I just went here, export to Excel. Out comes the file. Bang. Just open this up a little bit. So here's my issues list. Tracking numbers, finish date. Here's the owner. You notice we've got multiple people putting in issues, and Clara happens to be the one reporting. I can have other fields in here too. I won't spend a lot of time on that. It's not formatted very well. But the point is, I can control what's shown in the list, what's exported out, and I can quickly get a report out to show and share with other people. But I'm keeping them centrally managed. Anytime you want an up-to-date report, come right here. Don't worry about, do I have the latest one? Which one did I get in email? That kind of thing. Okay, I want to go back and look at something else related to the project. That was the track point that I made. What about documents? All right, I want to bring something up here. Just make this bigger on the screen. Let's take a look at the work breakdown structure. These are all of the individual phases, milestones, gates, tasks, etc. within the project. Now, what I'm looking at right here is just the first level. So I've got a phase and a gate, a phase and a gate. This is the way my project's organized. But what I want you to see here is the fact that the deliverables, that's what I see in this column right here, the deliverables are connected. They're connected, in this case, a couple of deliverables connected to a gate. For instance, there's a bill of material part, and here's a different set of deliverables. It's a document. I've got things connected to phases, to gates. I can come down to individual tasks within a phase to actually look at connected deliverables if I wanted to do that. So let me just give you a quick example here. I'll bring up this document. Okay, so when it comes time to find your content, is there a faster way than looking at the project that's associated with the task or the phase of the gate that it's associated with and just clicking on it? I would argue that's pretty quick. Now, my point here is that this isn't necessarily even how the data was saved. Okay, so if we've got people saving CAD drawings, they might save them into a CAD drawing space. Some designer might put them there, but they're able to then connect those to the task they're working on. Now, of course, you can search, and I'll touch on this a little bit later. We can search in the system, but does it get any easier than just looking at the tasks you're working on and seeing what's connected to the task? So that was my point here, is that deliverables get connected right to the task so we can quickly see them. So let me just show you that point. I said I'd tell you something about searching. So find was the area of my little cycle chart earlier that I was talking about. If you got one central repository that's searchable, we can quickly get to the data that we want. So I've got a big list here. I put in a pretty general search result, right? It's sort of a Google-like search here. Just put in whatever you want. Now I can refine it, though. You know what? I was looking for a test document. So if I come down here and I say, well, I got who, when, what, where, etc. So what? Well, I'm looking for a document. If I just apply that filter, or in this case it's a tag, we call these 6W tags. If I just filter on that, we'll see that my big long list of search results got much shorter. Product development standards. Okay, that's exactly the document I was looking for. Bang, and here I am. So I've got revisions, versions, ownership, all these things. And I can even see that this document is a deliverable of a task, right? I can see where it's a deliverable. So everything's connected. One central repository, quickly locate our data. All right, so let me go back to home here, because we'll come back to Anovi here in a few minutes. But I want to switch back over to the PowerPoint. We've been through that build-up, but now I'd like to move over and ask you a question. So everyone here on the webinar, I'd like to ask, out of the 5 time savings that I mentioned earlier, which would be the most meaningful to your business? Now, you should see the polling interface. I think we see that up. And I'll ask that you select from the 5 choices to indicate the time saver that would be most meaningful to your business. We'll give everyone a few seconds to think about it and answer.
Okay, Jonathan, it looks like we have some results in, and interesting. Maybe you have to talk a minute on each one of these topics, but it's split 3 ways: central repository with search, advanced file sharing, and deliverable automation.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's interesting. It's such an even split. And I'm not surprised by that, right? I mean, I see how central repository with search and advanced file sharing, I see how those are clearly related. And, of course, they're also connected to deliverables, right? I mean, it's all about content, getting at your content, managing it, sharing it, and knowing what content is due when and how it fits your project. So that's not surprising to me, but very interesting that it's evenly split like that. Okay. All right, so let's keep going with the presentation. I mentioned the 3 things, right? We're doing time, money, and risk. So we've done time. Let's move on to talk about money. So how can we save on hard costs by using PLM tools from Dassault? Up first, order long lead items early. One of the first ways to save APQP-related hard dollars is to avoid spending too much in the first place. Too often, long lead items like raw material or maybe specialized but well-known subcomponents aren't identified and shared early enough in the process to allow them to be ordered at standard cost. And even when long lead items are identified early in the process, it's difficult to have visibility into common long lead items across projects for different customers. Being able to create early bills of material that are shared across the system is a key to finding this type of cost savings. So I'm not going to demonstrate this, and so I want to talk a little more about it for a second. What the solution is, bill of material management in Innovia is a no-brainer, but using that bill of material management up front, early in the process, to identify those key components and long lead items, that's where the real trick is on money savings here. I'll give you an example from a customer of ours who, they needed a lot of material because they were making plastic parts, but they would do specialized material from time to time on certain programs. But the point was they'd have one program for Honda and another for Toyota and another for Nissan, and it was maybe only a couple out of the 100 or so programs they were running that needed this special material. Well, if any one program ordered just the amount they needed, and they happened to remember it early enough because it was a long lead item, they could save a little bit of money by ordering it early. But if they pool it and they recognize what the long-term demand was going to be at PPAP and at the later stages, they could save significant money by getting the price break on the volume they wanted. So this is one of those where the planning helps. Okay. Avoid accidental expediting charges. And of course, I've got a story here too. Although not all component suppliers require tooling to produce their product, it's very common amongst auto and aero suppliers to have some kind of tooling, fixturing, jig, whatever it may be. The challenge is that APQP projects can get, quote unquote, lost, maybe is the right word for it, while waiting for tooling to be delivered or waiting for other groups to perform certain activities. During that dwell time, that's when things get lost. Now, with a project management tool like Innovia, project tasks like tooling validation can be back-scheduled from the APQP finish date to make sure that reminders are sent and projects get picked up again when tasks are due, instead of, oh, man, I forgot we had to come back to that. The tool's been in China for 2 months. I forgot it was coming in this week, and we missed it, and now we're behind, right? So having a system to provide reminders like this is essential to avoiding the hard cost of acceleration charges, like paying to have something shipped faster or paying an external machine shop to rush a change, that kind of thing. Reuse similar components. My goodness. Another hard cost that many people forget to consider is the cost of adding new, unnecessary part numbers. Each organization will have its own figure or estimate for the cost of introducing a new part number. But one company I worked with years ago had calculated this cost very specifically, and it was north of $20,000. That's $20,000 every time they created a new part number. Now, it's easy for an engineer to quickly justify to himself that it'll be easier to just model a new one than to take the hours required to locate a similar part and reuse it. I know, I say that, I've done that in the past, right? It was, oh, I know I need this thing, it's kind of a complicated bracket, it's a special material, but it'll just be faster to remodel it than to try to find the old one because I can't remember where it was used, what project it was on, I don't remember the part. But that's when an engineer thinks the cost is merely the time required to model the part, right? But that's not it. Once you realize the cost of introducing a new unnecessary part is likely to be thousands of dollars instead of just a couple hours of my time, no big deal. You'll be very interested in solutions like Exelead One Part. This is a sort of sister component to Innovia. Exelead One Part is great for quickly locating similar parts using more than just basic metadata, right? So if I don't know the part number, I don't remember the material or those sorts of things, great. What about semantic metadata? Things like hole size. You ever tried to search on a hole size? Well, it's interesting. You can actually do it with semantic metadata. And further than that, geometry, right? So you can model up a rough shape. You're like, well, I know it's generally like this, even if you don't have all the details. And you can throw geometry into the search engine and have it come back with similar results. So there are new ways to search today that can save you the time required to remodel and save you the money, the cost of new part introduction when it's not necessary. So part reuse, right? That's what I'm getting at with looked here. Okay, the next is show compliance to your OEM's APQP programs with software, not people, okay? Yet another place where unnecessary money is spent and can be saved is in the days spent preparing for and satisfying your OEM's auditing and certification teams. Whether you've got to do this every 6 months or every other year, it probably costs you a week, I'm going to guess, multiplied by multiple people who are preparing for and participating in the audit to prepare for and then answer the questions for your OEM certification team. Now, remember, this is per OEM that you work with, right? My initial premise is you don't just sell to one customer. You're trying to sell to as many OEMs as you can. So putting a system in place to manage APQP processes will drive your certification prep time down to near zero. It won't make it zero, but it should drive that prep time to next to nothing. And it should take the interrogation process when they come in and they want to ask you, show me this, show me that, where's this, that kind of thing. It should take that from days down to hours when you have everything that you need right at your fingertips instead of, well, hold on, let me sort through my filing system to locate that, or I need to call this person who's not at their desk, and then I'm going to call their boss to see when they're going to be back, and I'll have to get that for you tomorrow. Let me come back to that one for each audit inquiry. So a solution like this isn't going to happen overnight, right? You've got to get all your content in the system. Of course, it's going to be searchable once it's in there, but you've got to get all that data in there and have everybody using the system for this one to be a valid way to save money. So it's not likely to be the first benefit that you're going to get by putting a system like Innovia in place, but as you progress toward having all of your content and processes in the system, this cost savings becomes achievable, and it's very real, and it's very significant. Okay. Avoid delay penalties. Nobody wants to talk about exactly what it costs when they fail to deliver on time for an OEM. The simplest penalty is not winning the next piece of business from that customer. That's expensive enough, but what I'm suggesting you should be concerned with is not this opportunity cost, but the hard cost of a late delivery penalty. Now, whether the penalty is payable directly or it just reduces your company's profit margins over the life of the program, this type of cost is real, and it can be avoided in almost all cases, right? You just have to know soon enough. The issue is typically that management is not aware that on-time delivery is at risk, and simple dashboarding of project schedules will bring the necessary attention early enough so that penalties can be avoided by putting a strike team on the project and getting it wrapped up in time, right? You've probably had the same experience I have on this one is, you know, when it's kept a secret, when it's kept quiet, when not everybody realizes what's going on, that's when you really get in trouble. If people are aware soon enough, it doesn't mean anybody's going to be happy about it, but you can at least put the resources on it so that the customer doesn't have to know, right? So warn, early warning system here. Okay, so let's jump back out of the PowerPoint again for a minute. I'd like to show you a couple of these things in Innovia. So I'll come back over to Innovia. We're back at our home screen over here. So I want to touch on two, the digitize for compliance purposes and the warn for delays. So let's talk about how we get a system and a schedule tracked here inside of Innovia. So I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to come back to that project's dashboard that Clara is using, and I'm going to have her just create a new project so you can see how do we get things back scheduled for that warning, right? So that we know when the due date is, so we can tell when we're going to be late on delivering, and so that we get the visibility we need to be able to put a strike team on it in time if things are getting behind. So what does it look like to create a new project in Innovia? So I just did actions, new project, and you're going to see how we get this done. Now, I'm pointing this out to just contrast for you how different it is to do project management in a PLM system than it is with what you might traditionally expect from, like, say, a Microsoft project or trying to do it with a series of spreadsheets or something like that. Looks like I'm having some sort of internet lag here. I'm going to try and start that up again. So actions, create new project. Naturally, it's a demo, so something can't go, everything can't go perfectly smoothly. So just going to try and log back in as Clara here. I don't know what the cause of the delay is here. Well, I'm going to try this one more way. See if this gets me any better result. Oh, that's much better. Okay. I'm not sure why I was having that delay over on the other command. But so I'm creating a new project, and you see I've got options here. I can go from an existing project if I want to reuse something very similar that I've done before. I can import from an existing file. That could be a CSV. It could be a Microsoft project file, an Excel file. Or in this case, I'm going to use what I consider the fastest method, and that's to go from a project template in Innovia. So here's what's most interesting about this, I think, is once you've created a template in Innovia from sort of a standard project plan or standard work breakdown structure with all the phases, gates, milestones, tasks, etc. that you have in a typical, like, say, for instance, APQP project, you can then put in questions that sort of shape the type of project. All right, so let me show you what I mean. I'll pick this one. It's about a proposal project. I put questions in here that say, do we need costs from suppliers? Yes, we do. Is this a new business opportunity? No, it's not. This is going to adjust the tasks that are included in the project plan. So on the fly, I'm modifying my template to get exactly what I need. So I'll go ahead and click Next. It'll ask me to fill in a few things here. I'm going to call this the Scion 2018 seat renewal. Okay, and I'll just put that down in the description as well. You can see I fill in other things. I want to point out something else that's important. Schedule from. I want a back schedule. I don't want a forward schedule. I don't want to know, hey, if I start on this tomorrow, when will I get done? I know when I need to be done, right? It's a 2018 program, so I'm going to say, you know what, it's got to be, the proposal's got to be in by this September for this to work, September 30. Okay? And notice now my constraint type is every task starts as late as possible. So this tells me the latest I can start something and still get done on time to meet the schedule of that end date. Now, if I want to schedule differently, I can, but you get the idea. We can schedule to the target and then know when we're getting behind. So I'll say done. And here's my new project. Okay, so here are my gates, my phases. I can go in, I'll have a look at the WBS, and I can see the detailed work breakdown structure that was created. I'll open this up here so we can see it a little better. Now, nothing started on my project yet, but you can see from that template, I quickly have figured out, all right, well, if the end date here is September 30th, well, now when do I need to start? Okay, so everything is back scheduled from there. All right, so let's have another look at something here. While we're talking about quickly locating data, I can come up and look for that APQP project again. So I had this one for a seat that I'm looking for in particular. And if you remember, I can narrow down my results here. I've got lots of results like I had there. I can narrow this down, and this is the project I want. So again, central repository saves me time. I can quickly get to the information I need. All right, now another thing is about warnings, right? So how do I know when things are getting behind or when things might be getting behind? I'm going to pull up the WBS detail for this project because it's actually running. and so I can see what's going on. Look at this. Here are my phases and gates for an APQP project, not a deliverable. We've got a couple things. One, these green indicators tell us work's already done, this is on task, and it's fine. We've got a problem here. You can see that our progress is low, and we've got a red square. Now, if my dates were a little different, you notice this project was scheduled to be done in 2014, so of course everything's behind. But there's a quick visual indicator. What's green, what's orange, and what's red will tell us how we're doing. And I can even drill in and look down at the individual tasks. So I'll expand all levels and have a look at this. So as I just look down through the whole project, you can see lots and lots of detail quickly, what's done, what's in progress, what's not done, that sort of thing. And I'll give you one other quick look at this. Another good visual indicator to give us a warning up front about projects is where do things stand with tasks, with deliverables, and issues. So we get visual indicators about, well, what's pending but late, what's delayed already, what's active, what's on time. So you get the idea that we get lots of good information in dashboards to help us understand when things are getting behind or are behind, so that we know when to put that strike team in place and we can save those hard costs of penalties. All right, so back over to the PowerPoint because I've got a question for you here as well. Right, we talked about saving money. I had 5 areas here about buying parts, about getting reminders, taking a look for parts for reuse, digitizing your compliance process, and warning when things are about to be behind. So my question to you on a poll here is, which type of money saver would be the most meaningful to your business? So again, we'll fire up the poll. You see your 5 choices there. And I'll ask you to select from these 5 to pick the one that you think is most meaningful for your business. We'll wait a minute while everybody takes a few minutes to answer.
Okay, Jonathan, we've got some results here. You may be able to see them on your screen, but the number 1 answer is scheduling status visibility, and then followed by central task planning and system-based APQP certification. So number 1 by about a 2-to-1 margin is scheduling the status visibility.
Very interesting. And I'm not surprised by that. I mean, the tools that a lot of companies have today, they work for the person using the tool, but it doesn't necessarily work for everybody else in the company. And so not everybody's got the same visibility as the project manager or the person with that Microsoft project file. So that's very interesting, but it validates a lot of what I've seen. So good, very interesting. So now what about risks? This is my 3rd takeaway from today, right, is we want to talk about saving time, saving money, and mitigating and avoiding risk. So I told you I added risk to today's topics because I felt you couldn't talk about project improvements without touching on risk. And that's because you can never plan for everything. And in fact, you're better off if you're prepared to deal with the unexpected than if you try to plan for every eventuality. So how can a PLM system like Innovia help you manage the risk inherent in APQP? Track issues per project. So first, you can track each and every issue you and your team encounter during the APQP process and beyond in a central repository. Now, I already talked about this one, right? Yes, I did. I said that issue tracking can save you time, and it can. But it can also help you identify risk in your projects. So let me ask you a simple rhetorical question. I've got 20 APQP projects running in parallel, and an average of 8 active issues per project that I'm tracking at any point, right? These are simple numbers I could come up with if I look back at my projects. Now let's say one project has 25 active issues and another has 3. Which project is riskier? Now, could I have made that observation if all of my projects had their own separate issue tracking lists in Excel? Would that be visible to anyone but the person running the project? Does the person running the project have incentive not to share that data with others? So I'm giving you lots of things to think about here, but I think you can manage risk across the organization just by counting. right? If you record and you count, you get some useful piece of information to help you with risk. Estimate cost and maybe even profit early on in the process, right? And we touched on something similar to this a minute ago. It's a little different take on it. Next, you can be honest with everyone about what you do and don't know as early as possible, especially when it comes to money and cost of your product. Innovia has tools for bill of material costing, and part of this lets you identify whether costs are estimated, quoted, or actual. Real simple, three choices there, right? Where did you get this cost estimate from? Is it an estimate? Is it a quote that you got from a vendor? Or is it an actual cost, maybe from your ERP or the last time you purchased it? Some simple analysis on the total cost of an assembly by cost certainty, those three values I mentioned a second ago, can quickly identify which subcomponents need to be designed first, right? Because they've got the greatest potential to eat into your profits, and which ones are less significant and can wait until later. You know, you've got a nut or a bolt that's a 5-cent piece. You know what? Don't focus on it. It's not worth your time. So this might not fit your intuitive definition of risk, not necessarily the traditional risk people think about. And it's not like something's going to fail, but it is about identifying the riskiest parts of your estimate and working those areas first. Okay, so here's one that is more traditional. Use RPN to track risks. A third way to manage risk is with a simple but powerful out-of-the-box Innovia tool for risk management. You simply enter risks like you would enter issues, but you assign them two additional values, a probability and a severity. Now, maybe you've got a framework like this today, or you recognize it from FMEAs, right? A lot of people do something similar with FMEAs. But you multiply that likelihood by the impact, each on a 1 to 5 scale, and you get an RPN, a risk priority number. Then you actively review your risks and their RPNs and perform activities to reduce those RPNs. Each week, you should watch the risk burn down, right? And managers and executives should watch it too. And if things aren't burning down fast enough, you know what you need to do. You need to give it more attention before it gets to your customers' attention, right? So it's about ordering or prioritizing the risks based on some objective, not totally subjective, look at your risks. So tracking them, giving them RPNs so that you can order them, work them, and burn them down in the right order. Then lastly, get a schedule early warning system. My last suggestion for managing risk is just as simple as my first. You can manage the risk of missing a scheduled delivery by knowing when a miss is likely to happen in advance, right? We touched on this one back when we were talking about hard costs of avoiding penalties. So it's similar, but this one it's also inherent in risk. Keeping schedules and the potential delays on those schedules in front of people in a visual, colorful way and getting it in front of them every day is a good way to reduce risk, right? So you're always aware of what is becoming at risk and what's in good shape and it doesn't need your attention right now. I'll give you my analogy here is, you know, when the check engine light comes on in your car, you know you need to head to the dealership before you destroy your engine, right? Same's true here. You can do a lot to avoid a meltdown on the project if you've got the right gauges and indicators to tell you about problems before they're imminent. So I think alert here is one of the most important ways you can manage risk. All right, so let me switch out of the PowerPoint mode here again. Last time we'll go over and do a little bit of demo. I just want to show you a few things here. So I'm going to head back over to that project we were looking at earlier. A lot of good data in that ISD 2016 SEAT project. So here I'm going to be talking about from my list about counting the number of issues and RPN numbers so that you can order the priority of your risks. So I'll come in here. Back over in execution, you probably saw this earlier when we were looking at the list of issues. And we have the submenu for risks. So just like I added an issue, I can add a risk. when I add a risk, I come in and it's almost the same thing as adding an issue. I see we're running short on time, so I'm going to cut this short. I just want to point out type of risk, right? Probability and impact, right? Those are the two 1 to 5 scales that are going to get multiplied. I put in a 3 and a 4. Look, I've got an RPN of 12. You see, okay, so I won't keep adding that, but I've got some risks on my risk register here. And what I can do is come into any risk, and I can change its RPN over time, right? So here are the RPNs applied to this risk about supplier availability. Okay, so the first one here, when it was created, it had an RPN of 10. You know what? We found an alternate supplier. It moved down to an RPN of 5. I can create a new risk, or not new risk, excuse me. I can create a new RPN number for it if I'm continuing to burn that down. So again, in the interest of time, I won't go through that. But that's the idea, is you burn down that risk. We can watch those, and we can see how they're changing over time. Okay, so that's one way. Another way I mentioned was about counting issues, right? So I want to show you a couple ways to count issues. One is on each project, what do I have right here? Right in front of me, this is the number of issues associated with the project. So right in the top corner, we always have that visibility in front of us. And then the other way I'll show you, and by the way, there are other things you could set up in terms of dashboards to get this type of visibility and things that you want to see. But for Clara here, let's look at pending issues on the 2 projects she's working, right? So here's a whole list of projects that are related to Clara, but here are the ones that she owns. Here's one with 8. Here's one with 3, right? Bang. It's exactly the type of information I was talking about a second ago. Which one should she focus on today? She needs to pay attention to this one if she doesn't know what all 8 of those issues are. So without digging further into this, I could take you further, but we want to have some time for questions. These are other ways that you can manage risk by having your data inside of Innovia, so you can see the risk in your APQP programs. Okay. We talked about these 4 areas: count, predict, order, and alert. So I want to take one last poll here and ask about risk management. So let's look at the 4 that I just talked about there, and tell me which you think would help your business most. Which risk management activity would help you the most? So give everybody a minute to enter their answer.
Okay, Jonathan, it looks like all that are going to vote have. And the number 1 issue or consideration is identifying and controlling risks.
That makes sense, right? Having just a central risk register in the same way that we would have an issue register. You know, it's a basic need, but it's an important one, right? So everybody's reading off the same page, working to the same sheet of music. So that makes sense to me. Okay, so that's the core of our message today. I want to just recap for you those 3 messages, right? The 3 takeaways I hope you got out of what we talked about today. The first is about time, right? So there is time to be saved in your APQP process. The second, cost. There's money to be saved in APQP. There are a number of areas where you can save hard dollars in your APQP process. And then lastly, hopefully you're going to like my little drawing for this one, it's about risk, right? Managing the risk that's inherent in an APQP process. You can manage it, you can mitigate it, and you can avoid it. So those are the 3 messages I hope you took away from today's presentation, is we've got ways to address all of these. All right, Rich, back over to you in case we've got some questions from our audience.
Sure, good. We'll give everybody a minute or 2 to send in their questions to us. So, hey, Jonathan, you know, it's rare I catch that you missed a detail, but you bring that die with the 5 adjacent to the 2 up here to the casino with me, will you? It should be on the opposite side. Thank you. But,
shows you I'm not paying attention to dice too much, Rich. Sorry about that.
Well, or I pay too much attention to them. So anyway, yeah. Well, good. Well, let me present a question here. Here's one that I've gotten, and we'll wait for our audience to give us one, but something I do run into fairly often. One of my OEMs is asking us to move to a global APQP process. So one APQP process for supplying parts to multiple geographies. Can Innovia help with that?
That's interesting. You know, I've heard a question like that as well, Rich, and you know, I'm not a student of the automotive, more so than just working with a number of automotive supply customers that we have, but I've heard that coming up more and more, right? And the context has been, you know, my OEM, typically they've bought in Europe from European suppliers for, you know, whatever it may be, seats, fasteners, et cetera. And they'll buy from somebody in North America or the North American plants and that kind of thing. Even if it's the same design, you know, they might have one geography lead the design, but when it comes to supply, it's geo by geo. And I've heard that's really changing, right? You know, somebody like Ford wants to buy from one supplier who can deliver in all geos, and they want pricing per geo, but they want one bid. They want one APQP, right? And I do think systems like Innovia, that's what you need to be able to respond to that, right? I mean, it's hard enough to respond in each geo, in each team doing it, but now when you put together each of your company's teams from those different geographies and ask them to all work together on one answer, my goodness, you know, I don't think you can get it done without a collaborative system like this. So it's a valid question. I've heard the same thing, Rich.
Excellent. Well, in the interest of time, I know we want to keep our audience on schedule. I'm going to move along here. So I did want to thank you, Jonathan, for providing that question and answer, and we'd be happy to answer other ones offline here. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, this is the third webinar in our series. You can go to our website, www.adaptivecorp.com, for replays of the Transparent New Product Development Processes webinar, and also our 3 ways to win more and better ETO business. So look under the resources menu on the on-demand webinars, and while you're there, take a look at our latest blog post. So before I close out, I wanted to let the audience know, for those questions that were unanswered, and maybe ones that haven't yet been asked, a member of our team will be calling you very soon to hear about your questions and prepare a follow-up session to investigate your individual needs and challenges. So with that, I thank you again, Jonathan Scott from Razor Leaf Corporation, and this is Rich Tenaglia, Sales Director for Adaptive Corporation. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This is the end of our webinar. Goodbye.